Well, good morning, everybody. I'm back at my seat in my classroom. The internet is working this morning, and so all is well. We are on episode 87 today, and we are working our way through conspirator number 3. We've covered two conspirators to this point. First one was the deep state, which we defined as the national security apparatus and the corporations that feed it. And we were able, that was the longest section because it involves so many players, all the big corporate heads, these big corporations that feed off the military industrial congressional complex, and of course the CIA and the FBI, the Joint Chiefs. It's all mixed up in one big pot of stew. We call it the deep state. Um, Listened to a really interesting interview this morning on my way in. Uh, from an interview with General or Bell Fletcher Prouty about General Lansdale and his presence in Dealey Plaza on the day JFK was shot, and how I didn't realize Lansdale had resigned or retired from the Air Force on October 31st, 1963, literally days before the assassination. And of course, Lansdale was Prouty's boss. And if you remember, Prouty was the guy that was involved in all of the covert activities through the 50s. He was the liaison between the CIA and the Joint Chiefs. Interesting that his boss was in Dallas on that day. Anyway, that was deep state. Two was the organized crime element. We got into that last week. And now we are in the anti-Castro Cubans. And yesterday we talked about the assembling of all these anti-Castro Cubans who are extremely emotionally invested in getting back to Cuba, willing to fight and die for the cause to get rid of Castro. And these became easily exploitable foot soldiers for all the moving parts that had the same interest, not for the same reasons. They were more interested in money. The organized crime used them for their foot soldiers. CIA used them for their foot soldiers. And these anti-Castro Cubans were very, very willing to be used. They just needed training. They needed weapons. Today, we're going to look at a principle that I learned early on in my coaching career, something to avoid. Now, the stakes aren't quite the same. I wasn't dealing with issues of national security or revolution or people's homeland. I was dealing with playing time or wins and losses, things of that nature. I was Some of the best advice I was ever given. One of my first bosses, he was the AD at my school, and he had just heard me speak. And I had talked to parents, some of the community members, and probably said too much, probably promised a little bit more than I could deliver. And I was caught up in the moment. You know how you are when you're young. So we're talking later, and he just said, something to think about in the future. You can never go wrong promising little, delivering much. Where things can go wrong is when you overpromise. And I've never forgot that. Promise little, deliver much. And boy, that is truer words have never been spoken with respect to the topic that we're going to be covering today. The question is, how did JFK's promises work at cross purposes, causing more problems for himself and his own government? We're going to see how he gets tied up in a pretzel knot with his own words, his own promises, and it gets used against him. It's one thing not to make any promises. These people that are so emotionally tied into this cause won't hold you to, the intensity with which they supported him when he made the promises gets turned against him when they realize he's betrayed them a couple times. And they become equally intense in their opposition to him. And it even becomes necessary to remove him because he is the obstacle now to achieving what they really want, which is to get rid of Castro. A couple pictures here. The Kennedy brothers were obsessed with Castro. And you can see Castro, the specter of Castro, looming over their shoulders. It seems like every decision they made with respect to foreign policy in some manner, shape, form was connected back to Castro. It also started their administration off on the wrong foot, dealing with Castro, Bay of Pigs. And one of the very last things that was revealed about JFK and his presidency before he died was his negotiations, his back-channel negotiations, secret negotiations with Castro, and how Bobby suspected the anti-Castro Cubans were the ones who actually, they were the foot soldiers who actually killed his brother. From start to finish, the JFK administration, Castro was looming over both brothers. And he's going to make some ill-fated promises that are going to get him caught in a dragnet. Because counterbalanced with his desire, and I think it was a legitimate desire, I think it was authentic early on to get rid of Castro. And but counterbalanced with that is it's Castro's relationship with Khrushchev and Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union. Boy, that made it tricky. And so Kennedy has to figure out a way to thread the needle to keep people here domestically in America happy, which was to declare Castro an enemy and try to get rid of him, but at the same time, keep Khrushchev from being an enemy to the extent that we go to war with the Soviets, a nuclear power over it. And that's going to come to a head in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he's walking a fine line. And I don't think, well, obviously he didn't negotiate it successfully or he would have lived. This is another group he's got to keep happy. These are the anti-Castro Cubans. Picture there of him at the Orange Bowl. This is in 1962, not long after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when everybody suspects that he's caved again and made more promises to Khrushchev. But then he comes out publicly and just basically promises to all the people assembled there, hey, nothing's changed. We're going to find out those words are impossible. That promise is an impossible one to keep. That bottom picture down there is probably when the rubber began meeting the road. I told you the story in an earlier episode about William Pauly's yacht and John Martino venting to William Pauly on the yacht that something needs to be done to this Kennedy, this blankety blank. He just goes on and on about how he shut down Operation Mongoose and he took all our weapons and he took our C4 and he arrested E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis and he did this and he did that. He sold us out, blah, blah, blah. And William Pauly says, don't worry, John, we're going to kill that blankety blank. Well, what he's talking about is this. Now, these are small pictures, sort of a collage, but this is the JM Wave Station down in Miami. This was headquarters to Operation Mongoose. And Mongoose was the overarching program that included a lot of different things. It included executive action assassination program. It included sabotage and infiltration and spying, and economic embargo and warfare, all kinds of things launched in Cuba's direction at Castro. And after Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy shut it all down, and they were out of business. And all of a sudden, CIA's out of business with respect to Cuba. The organized crime is out of business with respect to Cuba, and the anti-Castro Cubans are out of business with respect to Cuba. And that was a bridge too far for the anti-Castro Cubans and for all the others as well. I've divided these suspects or these conspirators into separate entities, but I gotta stress again, 3 of them are virtually one and the same. Organized crime, CIA, anti-Castro Cubans are all wrapped up in the same big bundle of joy. I mean, they're all using each other and they all have the same agenda virtually. And so you're not going to please one at the expense of the other. They're all going to be pleased or they're all going to be unhappy. That's just how it is. And they all have different areas of expertise and they used those areas of expertise to accomplish their overall goal. Of course, that began the march towards November 22nd. What sealed Kennedy's fate was when the CIA leaked the subject of their wiretaps, found out that William Atwood, Lisa Howard, Jean Daniel, all these others were acting as intermediaries for the Kennedy government to back channel peace negotiations, to officially recognize Castro's government, to legitimize Fidel Castro himself. That was the coup de grace that became unacceptable. I left off with this slide yesterday. I wanted to just start here to sort of set the scene today because obviously the very first interaction between the Kennedy government, the new Kennedy government, and Castro's government is going to be Bay of Pigs. And a lot of self-reflection after that disaster, why it went wrong. And we can go in about 5 different directions why it went wrong. I mean, one of the reasons it went wrong was because the CIA intended for it to go wrong. They intended for it to be a failure, but to force JFK's hand to authorize U.S. military force, which would lead to an invasion, which would lead to the overthrow of Castro. We would own Cuba, all right, to force his hand. So it was intended to be a failure, number one. Number two, the promise or the hope turned out to be an illusion that the Cuban people would rise up and join the invasion. It never happened. That's another reason it failed. So faulty intelligence. Number three, the fact that the Cubans and Castro had a vast spy network in Miami and knew everything that was coming, knew everything that was happening, knew the plans. So there was no element of surprise. They planned for an element of surprise. They got there, and the only ones that were surprised were the ones launching the invasion. How did they know that we were coming? So we were surprised. They weren't surprised. So that's a third. Another reason is the slipshod way in which we took out their Air Force. We took out most of their planes, but not all of their planes. And then we thought, well, they can't stop what's coming with just 2 remaining planes. Well, turns out they could. There were any number of reasons why the Bay of Pigs was a disaster. But I think one of the biggest reasons is the lack of intelligence on our part that was credible and helpful, and the abundance of intelligence that Castro had because he had spies. He knew what was coming. So, the basics of the plan was to use these B-26 bombers painted to look like Cuban planes to take out Castro's 10-jet Air Force. We got 7 of them. And the subsequent raid to take out the remaining 3 was called off because no one thought the remaining 3, I think I said 2 earlier, but it was actually 3. The remaining 3, they didn't feel like could stop what was coming. But of course they did. The subsequent invasion starts to go south almost immediately because of those jets. Those, they're strafing the beach. There's no place for these, the brigade to hide. They are making a landing on a beach. And you got jets flying overhead, and they're just strafing the beach. And of course, you got forces on the ground too. You can't find them both. That was the whole point of taking out the Air Force to begin with. And so that's when the CIA appeals to JFK for air support. JFK was operating under 2 assumptions. Number one, you already took out the planes. I authorized it in advance to take out the planes. Now the operation has begun. I'm not going to come in with the U.S. Air Force now and give away what's supposed to be a covert operation. And that's the second assumption. We already agreed the U.S. military force is not going to be involved. And so he doesn't change his mind. He sticks to his original. They thought he would, but he didn't. And they assumed, because of what Eisenhower had done before in Guatemala and Iran, that JFK did the same. But he didn't. He stuck to his guns, and he took the defeat. He owned it. And no one thought in 3 months' time, he's just barely got his seat warm as president. He's taking a major humiliation, and he's taking it. And he has all the power in the world not to. He could circumvent this whole humiliation he's about ready to have to endure. But as a matter of principle, sticking to his guns, he says no. And this is going to enrage the powers that be within the power structure of the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, obviously the anti-Castro Cuban community. Here you see some pictures. Top left, kind of hard to see. My picture's in the way. I apologize. See if I can move it a little bit. That's the ship that dropped off the Cuban Brigade. It's on fire. So, if you're the Cuban Brigade, you have nowhere to go. You can't go back to the ship. It's sinking. You're on the beach, trapped. The bottom pictures are the Cuban Brigade under arrest. They've been captured, some dead bodies, Cuban soldiers posing around the dead bodies. This was a major humiliation for the new Kennedy government. Obviously, a big stroke of genius. It makes Castro look like a genius to his people. It established him. You're talking about, he's new too. He's relatively new, and there's a lot of questions about him and his new government. And in their first real big test, he stands up to the Americans and he embarrasses JFK and the Americans. And in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of his people, this legitimized him. There's so many ways Bay of Pigs was such a disaster because, we've already screwed up our approach to Cuba in general with the embargo and pushing them into the arms of the Soviets. Now at the Bay of Pigs, we've firmly established Castro. He's entrenched now, and now the Soviets see, oh, this is a potential cudgel we can use against the Americans 90 miles off their coast. This is beautiful. They've been messing around our hemisphere forever. Now we can mess around in theirs. And we've got a guy who's not a coward on our side that we can ally with. And boy, it's so many ways. Bay of Pigs was a disaster. So here you see a famous picture of them being taken prisoner. This is the Cuban Brigade. These are the anti-Castro Cubans the CIA trained. And now, in full view of the entire world, they've been humiliated on the beaches. And really, it's not them who's been humiliated. It's JFK and the government. The American government's been humiliated. Now, publicly, JFK goes in front of the cameras and takes the blame. He says, I am the responsible officer of the government. I'm the one that green lighted this. Falls out my shoulders. And he stands there and takes it like a man. That's this famous quote, that press conference quote, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan. And he's acknowledging the fact that, I'm getting off to a rocky start here. I admit it, basically. And I've always admired that press conference because, you can fault him for strategy, you can fault him for tactics, you can fault him for this or that, inexperience, possibly, whatever. Maybe being naive. I don't know. You can fault him but you can't fault his integrity in this moment. He's told him what his decision was, and he stuck to it. Then when it went south, instead of blaming everybody, like presidents do now, he went there and he took the blame. Imagine that. This was an Eisenhower plan. What would presidents do today? What do they do? Presidents get in office, and one of the first things they do is they blame their predecessor for the poor economy they inherited. And they use that, they suck off that tit as long as they can. I mean, at some point they got to own it, but they'll run with that excuse as long as they can. That's been my experience. That's the political leadership I've gotten used to. Boy, in 1961 here, the American people are hearing an honest appraisal from an honest broker who's saying, I screwed up. I almost said something I was supposed to say. I screwed up. That's what he's saying publicly. Privately, he is angry. And he tells his brother, amongst others, quote, I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Because they took him for a ride. They lied to him. Now, this ain't the first time they've lied to him. coming off the campaign where they kept telling him about this missile gap. We've talked about that earlier. He finds out now that's a lie. There's no missile gap. Not, at least not that we're we're on the short end of. We're actually ahead. And he goes, I feel like a fool because I've been out there campaigning on a missile gap that we were behind. Turns out we're ahead. They used me. And now 3 months into the administration, they used me again. They got me suckered into something. They, and and lied to me about the Cuban support at home and about how easy it would be, and lie upon lie upon lie. And he's not happy. He's not a happy camper. This begins somewhere back, and I don't know which episode it was, but I mentioned this. I believe it to be true. You want to boil it down, the essence of the JFK assassination? You want to boil it down to, or distill it down to one reason? I mean, I can give you a lot of reasons, and they're all valid. But what got him killed was Cuba. Plain and simple, Cuba. The politics of Cuba. 3 months in, Bay of Pigs, and he's already at war. There's no honeymoon for JFK. 3 months in, he's already at war with the CIA. And of course, as we learned from Chuck Schumer when he was talking about President-elect Trump a few years ago, he said, I don't know why he's going to war with the CIA. They have a million ways to Sunday to get back at you. And truer words have never been spoken, to repeat a cliche again. And here he is 3 months in. JFK's at war with the CIA. Over what? The Bay of Pigs, a covert operation, a CIA covert operation to overthrow Castro and invade Cuba. And it never changes from that moment on. His presidency, I don't want to say it was doomed. I don't think it was doomed. I just think he was a marked man from that point forward. All right, so I already mentioned this. Castro is the man now. In our hemisphere, he looks like the Headley Dan Duke. He looks like Boss Hogg, the old Dukes of Hazzard show. He has stood up to the Americans. And in Latin America, that's a big deal because they've been pushed around and pushed around and pushed around by the man. And that's the United States for years. And one of their own, I can just imagine all these other Latin American countries, they're happy as hell to see one of their own give it to the United States the way Castro just gave it to them. And Castro's a hero now, not just in his own country, but in the entire region, in the hemisphere. It's one of the things that really becomes a problem for us going forward is the revolution in Cuba starts, and he starts exporting it or trying to export it to all these other Latin American countries. And they're, in some cases, willing recipients because they see how he stood up. He's a strong man, and he led his people to this victory over the Americans. And boy, he's a survivor, and all these things. He becomes like a mythical. Like I said, here we are worried about communism in Cuba, and because of Bay of Pigs, now we need to be worried about communism in Nicaragua and El Salvador and all these other Latin American countries because you got these copycats, and all because how badly the Bay of Pigs went. None of that happens. He didn't have near that appeal that Bay of Pigs doesn't have. All right, so what happens in the aftermath? The White House has to secretly negotiate with the Castro government to get the survivors of the Cuban Brigade released. We end up giving the Cubans some aid, some medical aid and some money and things of that nature. And then we invite them to the White House. And you can tell the Cuban Brigade standing there for this photo op on the right. I don't see many smiles. Nobody is smiling. They're there with the president, whom, in their view, they've had plenty of time while sitting there in captivity to analyze what went wrong. And of course, they've heard from their superiors, I'm sure, what they think went wrong, and everyone's pointing the finger at the president. So now here they are with the president. Half of them are, not half, but a good number of their partners in the cause are dead in the invasion. The rest of them were captured. Now they've been released, but they're part of a failed mission. And when you try to take out somebody like Castro, you better succeed the first time, because if you don't, there's an old ironclad principle: if you aim too high too fast, you miss. All you do is make it stronger. And that's exactly what we've just done. We've made Castro stronger. So the next time this happens, if there is a next time, it's going to be harder. And everybody knows it. That whole little gathering there at the White House is just for public appearances. It had to be excruciating for everybody, including the president. Captain Eduardo Ferrar, who led the Exile Air Force. Okay, that was the planes that got 7 of the 10, but not the last 3. Said, quote, "The Bay of Pigs failure was Kennedy's fault. Kennedy was a little bit immature, a little bit chicken. Today, 90% of the Cubans are Republicans because of Kennedy, that mother blank." And that's true, by the way. It's interesting. Whenever I hear people talk about electoral politics and they breaking down all the different nationality groups in America, the African Americans and how they vote, the Asians and how they vote. When they get to Hispanics, not all Hispanics are created equal, evidently, because some Hispanics that come from Mexico and Latin America, South America, they tend to vote Democrat. But the Hispanics from Cuba, the Cubans who get lumped in that category, they vote Republican. So it's kind of interesting how politics works. And in this case, it's influenced by, what happened during a Democrat administration that, didn't achieve everything that they said that they were going to achieve. Initially, they supported Kennedy, but that went away pretty quick. So in the aftermath, here's where Kennedy starts making he's already made promises, right? He made promises during the '60 campaign to the anti-Castroites. I'm going to get rid of Castro. In fact, he sort of taunted Nixon about the Eisenhower Nixon response to Castro and how weak it was. It wasn't aggressive enough. Now he was going to be more aggressive. And that was the promise that got these folks to support JFK initially. Then Bay of Pigs happens, and he promises Khrushchev, okay, we're not going to mess around in Cuba anymore. And he promises to shut down Operation 40 and all this kind of stuff. So he's made that promise. Well, then he turns around and changes the name of Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose, which means he's breaking his promise to Khrushchev. And he's trying to keep his promise to the anti-Castroites, the folks here at home. So he's made a decision that what matters more is domestic politics than foreign policy. And he's saying, well, the hell with Khrushchev. I've got to worry more about my own backside here at home. And so he tells all the principals, including his brother Bobby, whom he puts in charge of Operation Mongoose, quote, "No time, money, effort, or manpower should be spared." This is actually Bobby saying this, as he's given his underlings marching orders about what Operation Mongoose should entail. And in both Bobby and JFK's minds, Fidel Castro becomes public enemy number 1 at that point. And you can understand why. He just embarrassed both of them, specifically JFK. And so, he's human. And he did come into office promising to get rid of him. his first attempt was a swing and a miss, but that doesn't mean he's out. He's going to take another swing at this. And he just chalks it up to, that was a Eisenhower plan. It was a CIA operation. And the reason it failed is because it had the wrong leader and the wrong plan, and it was just implemented poorly, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to put Bobby in charge. That's always who he trusts. When you want to know what JFK's real intentions are, just follow Bobby. Bobby's the only one he really trusts. And to something that's really important, he's going to put Bobby in charge of it. And so this sort of betrays JFK's real feelings about this. When he puts Bobby in charge of Operation Mongoose, there's no doubt that he's serious about this. So we have now 2 promises on record. Okay. And they're working at cross purposes. He's promised the anti-Castroites, I'm going to get Castro. He's promised Khrushchev he's done messing around in Cuba, and Operation 40 is being terminated. But in order to keep the first promise he made to the anti-Castroites, he just changes the name to Operation Mongoose, puts Bobby in charge, and redoubles his efforts. So there's 2 promises. One he's trying to keep, and the other it wasn't worth the paper it was written on or the airspace it was spoken into. I mean, the promise to Khrushchev, and Khrushchev takes notice. Okay. Khrushchev notices. And so here we see Operation 40 renamed Operation Mongoose. And this becomes, and of course, within Operation 40 or Operation Mongoose is a new assassination program, which we talked about before, a separate one entirely from executive action, which is entitled ZR Rifle. And William Harvey is put in charge of that. That comes about that. Now, as we learned, ZR Rifle was, they were already talking about it days after JFK was inaugurated. And then just a few short weeks after Bay of Pigs, Harvey and his number 2, I can't remember his name right now, are writing what they call the creation document, putting ZR Rifle together to take out an American target using CIA assets. And of course, that was a completely separate assassination program from executive action, which was focused more on foreign targets using foreign nationals. So that's why I say the Bay of Pigs was this planted the seeds of JFK's demise, because we have this super secret ZR Rifle program led by William Harvey, who is the CIA's assassination expert. I mean, everybody knows that. And it's a plan to assassinate an American target using CIA assets. Holy cow, that's different. Okay. And so that's kind of a little offshoot that's being created off to the side here. Wow, Kennedy and Bobby and all, they're running around trying to overthrow Castro. Some decisions have already been made about Kennedy and whether or not he could be relied upon. So, well, a lot of things at work here. We found out in the 70s as a result of church hearings about executive action. We didn't know any of that. We didn't know that was part of Operation Mongoose. We didn't know it was part of Operation 40. We didn't know it even existed. It's illegal, technically, for us to be assassinating foreign heads of state. Would the church committee have pursued ZR Rifle a little bit more aggressively, they would have been stunned to learn what that was about. It's one thing to learn that the CIA has an instruction manual how to assassinate using different techniques and different technologies, et cetera, et cetera. How to assassinate foreign heads of state. And of course, they were successful in a number of cases, unsuccessful in a very prominent case, and that was Castro, time after time after time after time. You can almost understand that whole program, what that was about. It's illegal, but nevertheless, you can understand it. I can just see Frank Church in the hearings trying to think this thing through. Wait a second. If we have an executive action program for foreign, what's CR rifle for? Why are we duplicating our efforts? And you just want them, we have hindsight. It's 2020. Looking back, we want them to say, let's press on in this direction a little bit and find out more about ZR rifle. What was that about? What specifically was that? We want to know more about ZR rifle. And what differentiates these two programs. Boy, time and again, we saw it during Watergate, same thing. When John Dean and the chief of staff for Nixon reveal what Nixon meant when he said Bay of Pigs all the time on the tapes. He's talking about the JFK assassination. When he talks about Bay of Pigs guys, he's talking about these covert operators that were involved in the JFK assassination. When he talks about that and they decipher that code for them, you just want the Watergate committee to say, oh, let's pursue that a little bit. But they don't. They always tie off those loose ends and they go back to what they were originally asking. And this huge area of inquiry just gets left for researchers to go into later, to pursue on their own. The government never seems to be curious about those things to the degree that they could get real answers to these real questions. They just kind of open the door a little bit, but they don't go through the door. And so we get exposed. We find out that there is a ZR rifle program that exists, but we don't know what it's for. It takes researchers, independent researchers, to pursue it, look at the documents, and figure it out. So it's frustrating sometimes. All right. So what's the next? I'm kind of going through a timeline here. So what's the next thing? Well, our U-2 spy plane is flying over Cuba. And as it's flying over Cuba, obviously it's taking high resolution photos. And what it discovers is, or reveals, is that the Soviets have been putting missiles in Cuba. Now, this was Khrushchev's response to Kennedy's broken promise. Khrushchev says, okay, I see what you're doing. You're playing to the home crowd. So I'm going to put some missiles in Cuba so that when this next invasion comes, because it's obviously going to come through Operation Mongoose, maybe you'll think twice about it, because now you're going to know the stakes are much higher. You're not invading a third world nation trying to take out a 10-jet Air Force and whatever couple 1,500 numbered forces Castro might have on the ground. Now there's nuclear missiles aimed at you. That's a little bit different kind of deterrent. So Khrushchev is up in the ante here. And of course, that puts all of pretty much the contiguous United States within range of these missiles, just like the Soviets have been within range for all these years of our missiles in Turkey and Italy. So turnabout's fair play. Khrushchev is playing a smart game here. He's saying, I'm not that worried about Cuba. Cuba's not really the issue here. This is geopolitics, and I'm negotiating. And I don't like these missiles aimed at us. So I'm going to put some missiles. I now have a place where I can put my missiles and aim them at them. And if I play my cards right, in exchange for us removing our missiles from Havana, we can make a demand now that the United States remove their missiles from Turkey and Italy. And, what wasn't possible just 6 months earlier is now possible because of this beautiful setup we have in Cuba. So, that's a genius move on his part. And so it launches us into this missile crisis. And we've already talked about that. Kennedy issues the quarantine and very specifically does not call it a blockade. Tells everybody down the pipeline, don't call it a blockade. That's an aggressive term. And we're trying to prevent a nuclear war, not start one. We want to give the Soviets an opportunity to back down, but not look like cowards. And so there's this 13-day standoff in the skies and in the water around Cuba. And, we talked about October 27th and how close we came. The world came to nuclear war. But in the end, the back channel works. And Khrushchev's gambit also works. He gets a 2-for-1 deal out of it. Those missiles those Jupiter missiles that are in Italy and Turkey, which you see here on the left map, that have a range well into the Soviet Union, including its capital city, Moscow. Kennedy agrees to remove those missiles from Italy and Turkey in exchange for the Soviets removing their missiles from Cuba. Wow. But in addition to that, Kennedy makes another promise. No more Cuban invasions, which, if you're Khrushchev, you're saying, because that was initially his only promise. And Khrushchev's like, no. You've already made that promise. And you broke it. Operation 40 became Operation Mongoose. You broke your promise. So you're going to have to add some more to prove you're serious. So that's when the missiles get agreed. JFK agrees to remove the missiles. And in exchange, all they have to do is remove their missiles from Cuba. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. And so here we see another promise, this time to Khrushchev. So you see what he's doing. The Cuban Missile Crisis fundamentally changed the calculus in JFK's brain. The chemistry of his brain just completely changed. Before the Cuban Missile Crisis, he made his bed with domestic politics. And he said, if I'm going to make two promises that contradict one another, I'm going to keep the one that keeps my people here at home happy. And, Khrushchev can just suck it up, basically. Well, then Khrushchev counteracted and made his play. And we come to the brink of nuclear war. And now all of a sudden, Kennedy's like, takes a deep breath and he's like, okay, all right. Who can I afford to anger the least? Who can I afford to alienate the least? Who can I afford to break my promise to the least? I can survive domestically if I break a promise to these anti-Castro Cubans down in Miami. I can't survive a nuclear war. Nobody can. And so he says, since one of them has nuclear missiles and the other doesn't, I'm going with the one that has nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons. So now he flips and he's going to continue to make promises to the anti-Castro Cubans, promises he can't keep. But he was doing that before with Khrushchev. Now he's just saying, I'm going to keep my promise to Khrushchev and not keep my promise to the anti-Castro Cubans. After this back channel deal gets announced, he goes down to Miami at the Orange Bowl and makes a big show with these same guys, this Cuban brigade. They present him with a flag, thousands of people in the stands. I mean, he is just, in a very public way, laying down a marker saying, this flag will fly over a free Havana. And we want Cuba free and all these promises. And this is to reassure the Cuban community down there, hey, I haven't given up. I know Bay of Pigs didn't go right. And I know Cuban Missile Crisis, you guys had hopes for, but we emerged from that without a nuclear war. And we're alive to fight another day. And I want you guys to know that I'm still committed to the cause. But it's a promise he can't keep. He knows he can't keep it. He can't keep it. I don't know, I hate to say he's lying through his teeth, but he's lying through his teeth. He's promising something to these people he cannot keep. I've studied this a long time, and it's really informed my view of presidents when they make promises today. Because I would say Kennedy, on balance, was a man of great principle. And yet we've seen him flip-flopping all over the place with these promises here. And how he's angry. It almost caused a nuclear war. And so now it's like jerked him straight. But he's not straight completely because he's still lying. He's still lying to somebody. He's just changed who he's honoring the promise to and who he's not, who he's lying to. And I still believe he's a man of principle. I believe even his enemies thought he was a man of principle, which is why they killed him, because they knew he wouldn't change his mind over the big stuff. The little stuff, and I guess he's considering this the little stuff now. The big stuff is nuclear war. Can't have that. So on the big stuff, here's where I stand. On the little stuff, which this is little now, Castro's small potatoes, Khrushchev's the man of counts. And on the little stuff, if I have to lie, I'll lie. It's very, it's a power play. And it's going to cost him. But anyway, I was talking about how it's changed my perspective. I hear presidents make promises. I don't know if you remember one of the earliest elections I have recollection of as a young man. I participated. I worked on his campaign. I volunteered. I voted. I was George Herbert Walker Bush. Looking back, it's one of the worst votes I ever made. What I know about the Bush dynasty and all that now, but I was young. I didn't know any better. So, and of course, remember the promise he made, read my lips, no new taxes. And he promptly violated. That was a promise he made. Now looking back, I realize how cynical it was to get himself elected. Everyone was sucking off that Reagan economy, and they were afraid Bush would act as a, he called Reagan's economic plan voodoo economics. And so they were afraid he was going to go the opposite direction, raise taxes and grind everything to a halt. So he makes that promise to keep all the Reagan supporters on his side. He promptly breaks it. It was a very cynical promise made to get him elected. I would say that was the mark of somebody who was not principled. He was doing it to get elected. Kennedy is not doing that. This is 62. He's not in a re-election campaign. He's doing it. He's trying to keep America safe. And he's made a determination that these two things don't work. They're in tandem. They don't work together. And I'm going to have to choose a side here. And I choose the side to keep us safe. It's not about getting elected. Bush's promise was all about getting elected. And we could go on and give example after example after example of other people who have done the same. I'm not trying to paint a picture of Kennedy as a flip-flopper or a liar. I think he overpromised, like I did when I was talking to my team and to the community and my parents and stuff. He overpromised. And when he got caught in that overpromise after Bay of Pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis is the result, he gets serious and he says, okay, there's some people I can break promises to, and there's some people I can't. Now, in making that decision, I don't think he realizes the full weight of that decision and who he's breaking those promises to. It's not just these anti-Castro Cubans. Because his daddy had made promises during the 60 campaign, that means he's now breaking a promise to organized crime as well. And of course, the CIA has a lot invested in these covert operations in Cuba. It's not that he made a promise to the CIA, but now that they know his intention, they realize that he has now become an obstacle to them getting what they want in Cuba. And so the whole dynamic changes. This is that, I mentioned, I think in one of the earliest episodes when JFK went to Dallas, he took Jackie with him because everybody knew Dallas was going to be a trouble spot. And that's what JFK did his tour. Typically, when he was going someplace might be a little dicey, he always took Jackie because everybody loved Jackie. Nobody hated Jackie. Even JFK's enemies, most hardened enemies, loved Jackie. So here you see they're smiling at her. Everybody, in fact, all eyes are on her, including the president's. He knows he needs Jackie for this particular occasion. And he's just trying to keep up appearances. He's walking a tightrope. He's trying to string these people along as possible, keep them happy, while at the same time keeping his promise to Khrushchev. It really gives me a new respect for what leaders have to negotiate. Everyone has their pet issue. And a lot of people are single issue voters. I used to be a single issue voter. And you get that one issue wrong, I'll never vote for you. I mean, that's how I used to think. And there's no nuance in that. There's no gray areas. It's all black and white. And leaders have to, they live in the shadows. They live in the gray areas. They live in the nuance. And that's what JFK is trying to do. He's trying to nuance this. He's trying to keep a promise to Khrushchev to keep us out of nuclear confrontation, but at the same time, keep all these people on his side. And he's got organized crime in the background. He's got to somehow keep them happy too. It's quite a delicate balancing act. That's that famous quote. I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana. So this was the presentation the Cuban brigade made to Kennedy at this event. And maybe he gets caught up in the moment, like I did when I was talking to my team. And he overpromised. There's no way he can make this promise. There's just no way. So what happens next? Well, in October of 62, JFK has made a promise to Khrushchev not to invade Cuba. This is after the missile crisis. So 3 or 4 months later, he quietly, as quietly as he can, shuts down Operation Mongoose, closes the camps. And that's going to launch us into this deadly year of 63, when Pauly and Harvey and folks of his ilk continue to launch illegal operations against Cuba, trying to keep hope alive, mad as hell at JFK for the ZR rifle is trucking along. Harvey's making a trip from Italy back to Dallas to, quote, look around. David Atlee Phillips, known as Maurice Bishop, is meeting with Antonio Veciano of Alpha 66 and Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas in October. I mean, you see all these things at work. And by October of 63, JFK's fate is sealed, especially after the CIA releases or leaks not their knowledge of the secret back channel negotiations with Castro's government. When that comes out, and of course, that same month, the nuclear treaty is signed with the Soviets, the ban on the testing ban, nuclear test ban treaty. And JFK also issues National Security Action Memo 263, which says we're not going to have a Vietnam War. I mean, wow, in real time, some real dangerous things are happening. You got the CIA and Harvey getting this ZR rifle thing set up for an American target using CIA assets. And they're coming to Dallas. I told you at the beginning, the head of the, General Fletcher Prouty's boss, the general, retires from the Air Force, and he's the guy that's been running all these covert ops in Iran and Guatemala and all these other places. He comes, he ends up in Dallas in November on the day JFK is assassinated at Lansdale. You got all things that Kennedy's doing. The anti-Castro Cubans are finding out that Kennedy has betrayed them yet again. The big Orange Bowl promise turned out to be a fraud. Now he's negotiating with Castro. That's after Bay of Pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis. On and on and on. So everything is coming to a head, is what I'm trying to say. And by the time JFK goes to Dallas, it's like Sam Giancana when he sent that warning to Daddy Joe through Frank Sinatra. He had one word written on it, Giancana. And Frank Sinatra hands it to him and says, Joe, this is what I wanted to tell you. This is our friend. And he's basically letting him know, your sons are in jeopardy. And if you don't heed this warning, I've been sent to give you this last warning. If you don't heed this warning, I can't stop what's fixing to happen. Now, that was just a small element of this. That's organized crime. But think about when you get the Joint Chiefs involved, you get the CIA involved, and you get the financing of these big corporate heads that want a Vietnam and now realize they're not going to get a Vietnam. And you've got players like William Harvey and ZR Rifle putting things in place. By this point, there ain't anybody can stop what's fixing to happen. And we haven't even got to the last two conspirators yet who make this all possible. Both the immunity for all the players afterwards and the access that you're going to need to kill the president, which i.e. means the Secret Service. It's just unbelievable. In real time, I guess when the events are happening, you can get lost in the forest. You can't see the forest for the trees. But when you get 1,000-foot view or 10,000 or 50,000-foot view looking down on it later, it's just as obvious as the nose on my face what's fixing to happen. And what's really funny is that they thought they could blame a lone nut for all this. And then dispose of him with another lone nut and wipe their hands and tell the American people, well, that's that. Wow. What an amazing story. You just couldn't make something like this up. This is why there's so many books on it. It's just amazing. An amazing story. So that's it for today. That's episode 87. Hope you enjoyed it. I can't believe I got through an episode and my battery didn't die. And the internet didn't go out. All the technology worked so far, knock on wood. Okay. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Subscribe to this channel if you want to. It's free. No cost to you. Also, feel free to give me a thumbs up and check the notification box so you can get notified any time I drop new content. Also, feel free to comment. I try to respond to those comments. I haven't responded to yesterday's yet, but I will, I promise. So anyway, I hope everybody has a great day. Tomorrow we will conclude Conspirator 3 and begin on Thursday, Conspirator number 4. And we're closing in on a conclusion here. And so stay with me, and hopefully we'll get to a point where this all makes sense to everybody. If it doesn't already, hopefully it already does. Hopefully you're starting to put the puzzle pieces together and it's already making sense. All right, until tomorrow, everybody have a great day. Thank you.